She signed the termination paperwork on a Thursday at 2 in the afternoon and did not think about it again until the following Monday morning when her largest fleet contract evaporated in the space of a single email. Her name was Diana Cole, and she was the CEO of Vertex Transport, a regional logistics company based in Charlotte, North Carolina, that operated 47 commercial vehicles and moved freight across the Southeast Corridor for 11 primary clients. She had taken over the company from her father 3 years ago when he had retired to Florida, with a handshake and a handoff that had been more ceremonial than thorough, which meant that Diana had spent the first 18 months of her tenure discovering the specific texture of a company that had been built on relationships her father had maintained personally for 20 years and that did not automatically transfer with the title. She had managed it. She was good at managing things. She was 36 years old, and she had an MBA from Duke and the specific, unsentimental clarity of someone who had grown up watching a business be built and had decided early that the way to honor that was to make it better, not just maintain it. She had modernized the fleet management system, she had renegotiated 3 client contracts on better terms, she had cut 2 underperforming routes and added 1 new corridor that had produced 30% better margin than the route it replaced. She had also, in the 18 months of discovering the texture of her father's company, inherited a service contract with a garage on Providence Road called Mercer Fleet Services that had maintained Vertex's vehicles for 8 years. The contract was month to month, a handshake arrangement from her father's era, and it was significantly below current market rate. This was the kind of thing Diana noticed. She noticed it in October when she did a vendor audit, and the rate discrepancy was visible in the comparison. She had called the garage, spoken to the owner, a man named Joe Mercer, who had the voice and the cadence of someone who had been working on engines before Diana was born, and explained that she was reviewing all vendor contracts and would be issuing standard rate renewals. Joe had said he understood. The new contract had been sent. Joe had not signed it. Diana had followed up twice. Joe had said he was reviewing it. Diana had followed up a 3rd time in January, and Joe had said his son was doing the fleet work now, and his son was reviewing the numbers. Diana had waited until February and then sent a formal notice of contract termination, effective 30 days out, which put the termination date at the first Thursday in March. She had also, in the February notice period, begun working with a new fleet service provider, a larger operation in Concord with a standard rate structure and a digital management system and the specific, efficient impersonality of a company that serviced 40 clients simultaneously. The Mercer contract ended on Thursday. She signed the paperwork on Thursday at 2. She did not think about it again. On Monday morning at 8:47, her phone rang. It was Marcus Webb, her VP of Operations. He said, "Diana." She said, "What about it?" He said, "The Harrington account." She said, "What?" He said, "Email came in this morning. Contract cancellation, effective immediately, with a payment of the early termination fee." He paused. No explanation given. Diana read the email. Harrington Logistics was her largest client, a distribution company based in Gastonia that accounted for 31% of Vertex's annual revenue. The email was formal and brief, and it cited a contract clause that allowed either party to terminate with payment of the fee, and it contained no additional explanation. She called Marcus back and said, "Who have you spoken to at Harrington?" Marcus said, "I called their operations director. He said it was above his level and to speak to the CEO. She said, "Get me the CEO." The CEO of Harrington Logistics was a man named Paul Harrington, 3rd generation, who had inherited the company from his father the way Diana had inherited Vertex from hers. They had met twice in 3 years. He was cordial and brief in both encounters, and his company had been a reliable account that had given her no cause for concern. She called him. He answered. She said, "Paul, Diana Cole, can you tell me what happened?" He said, "Paul, I'm sorry this is abrupt." He sounded like he meant it. He said, "We've had a relationship with Mercer Fleet for 16 years. Joe Mercer kept every truck in our distribution fleet running for 2 decades. His son has been doing the same for us for the past year." He paused. "When I heard what happened with your contract, I called Thomas directly." He paused. "Thomas told me what the situation was, and I decided I couldn't continue to work with a company that operated the way you operated." He paused. "I'm sorry, the fee is in the wire." She said, Thomas Mercer. She said, the mechanic. Paul said, Joe's son. He's not just a mechanic, Diana. He paused. But I suspect you know that now. The line went quiet. Diana was at her desk in the Charlotte office with the Harrington termination email on her screen and the specific cold feeling of a floor that has shifted under a company she had inherited and was responsible for. She said, can you tell me what he told you? He said, call him yourself. He said it not unkindly. He said, I think you owe him that conversation. She found the number from Mercer Fleet Services. She called. A woman answered. She said it was the front desk. She was new. She'll pass the message along. Diana left her name and number. She sat at her desk. She looked at the Harrington termination fee in the wire. It was substantial. It was also 31% of annual revenue walking out the door in a Monday morning email. Her phone rang 40 minutes later. It was a number she didn't recognize. She answered. The voice was low and even and had the quality of someone who had decided before making the call what they were going to say and was saying it. He said, this is Thomas Mercer. You left a message. She said, Thomas, thank you for calling back. She said it with the professional control she always had at the beginning of difficult conversations, before she knew how difficult they were going to be. She said, I understand Harrington Logistics terminated our contract this morning and cited you as the reason. She paused. Can you tell me what you told Paul Harrington? He said, I told him the truth. He said it simply, no additional weight on it, just the truth. She said, which was? He said that your father had a month-to-month arrangement with my father for 8 years because Joe Mercer kept Vertex's trucks running during the 2019 breakdown season when 3 other garages in Charlotte were backed up 6 weeks. He paused. Joe charged your father below market because your father was having a bad year financially, and Joe thought the relationship was worth protecting. He said this the way he said everything, directly, as information, without accusation yet. He said, when you sent the market rate contract in October, I was going over my father's financials because he had a health situation and I was running the garage. I found the original agreement and I found why the rate was what it was. He paused. I called your office 3 times to explain it, and nobody would take the call. She said, I was told you were reviewing the contract. He said, I was trying to tell someone the history of the contract. He paused. I was told twice that the decision had been made, and the new rate was the new rate. She was quiet. He said, your February termination notice came on a day when I was at Charlotte Presbyterian with my father. He said it without using the information as leverage, just as context. He said, I called back that evening and was told the decision was final. She said, why didn't you? She stopped. She started differently. She said, what do you want, Thomas? He said, nothing from you. He said it immediately, and she heard in it the specific quality of someone who had made a decision and was not reconsidering it. He said, my father's garage will be fine. We have clients. He paused. I called Paul Harrington because Paul Harrington has been a Mercer Fleet client for 16 years, and he asked me directly last week what happened with Vertex, and I told him because I don't lie to clients. She said, you didn't call Harrington to hurt my company. He said, I told the truth to someone who asked me directly. He paused. What he did with it was his decision. She said, Thomas. She paused. I owe you an explanation. He said, you don't owe me anything. She said, I owe you the truth since we're having that kind of conversation. She said it with the quality of someone who has been confronted with their own behavior and is choosing carefully and with full awareness to face it rather than manage it. She said, I did a vendor audit in October and the rate was an anomaly and I flagged it as an efficiency gap. She paused. I did not ask about the history because I assumed the below-market rate was my father's preference and not something with a reason I needed to understand. She paused. I was wrong about that. He was quiet for a moment. He said, your father is a good man. She said, I know. He said, he visited my father at the garage every year on Joe's birthday for 8 years. He said it not as an accusation, as a fact about the relationship that had existed before she arrived. He said, they used to have coffee and talk about the Panthers. He paused. When my father called yours after the termination notice, your father called me directly. He said, Thomas, I didn't know. He said, he sounded terrible about it. She said, he called you? He said, last Thursday. He paused. He asked me what I needed. I told him I didn't need anything. He said he was going to call Diana. She absorbed this. He said, "I'm guessing that call hasn't happened yet." She said, "It hasn't." She looked at her desk. She said, "My father and I are—" She paused. She said, "It's complicated." He said, "Most things with fathers are." He said it without curiosity, as a statement of fact about the world. He said, "He built something, and you're building it differently, and you're both right about different things." He paused. "That's most family businesses." She said, "You sound like you have experience with that." He said, "My father wanted to retire. I wanted to modernize the garage. He wanted to keep every client on a handshake. I wanted contracts." He paused. "We found the middle." He said, "That's usually where the answer is, in the middle of two people who are both right about different things." She said, "How old are you?" He said, 34. She said, "You run the garage now?" He said, "Mostly. My father comes in on Tuesdays
and talks to the regulars and makes coffee and tells me things I already know that turn out to be things I didn't know." He said it with the specific warmth that came into his voice when he talked about his father, the same warmth she heard when he talked about the handshake contracts and the below-market rate and the 8 years of coffee and Panthers talk. He said, "I keep the schedule flexible." She said, "Thomas." He said, "Yeah." She said, "I'd like to come to the garage." She said it before she had entirely decided to say it, which was unusual for her, and which she registered. She said, "I want to meet you in person, and I want to understand what I missed when I did the audit." She paused. Not to renegotiate. She said it clearly because she wanted the distinction on the record. "I want to understand what was actually there that I treated as a line item." He was quiet for a moment. She held the phone and let the quiet be what it was. He said, "Tomorrow morning." He said it without explanation or condition. He said, "I'm here from 7. She said, "I'll be there at 7. He said, "Bring coffee if you want it. The machine here is functional, but it's not a selling point." She said, "I'll bring coffee." He said, "Okay." She was at the garage on Providence Road at 6:58. She had brought 2 coffees from the place on Selwyn that was good enough to be worth the minor effort of bringing it. The garage was already open, the bay doors were up, and the sound of a vehicle being worked on was audible from the parking lot. It was a Tuesday morning in March, and the Charlotte spring was arriving in the specific way it always did in March, warmer than it had any right to be, but not yet warm enough to trust. He came out of the bay when he heard her car. He was tall, dark-haired, with the hands she expected, the hands of someone who had been working on engines since his teens, large and careful and with the specific callousing that told you its own history. He was wearing work clothes and he had a rag in his back pocket, and he looked at her with dark eyes that were the eyes of someone who had been waiting for this conversation and had decided what kind of conversation he was going to have. He was also, which she registered in the same moment she registered everything else, clearly the kind of person who had been through something difficult and come out with it, everything essential, intact. And something else, a quality of settled attention, the specific quality of someone who had lost enough to know what mattered. She handed him the coffee. He looked at it. He said, "Thank you." She said, "Thomas." He said, "Yeah." She said, "Before we go inside." She looked at the garage. "I want to say something out loud, so it's said." He waited. She said, "I handled the contract review as a numbers problem, and it was a relationship problem, and I didn't know the difference because I hadn't been in the business long enough to know what my father had built in terms that weren't on the balance sheet." She said it directly, with the specific composure of someone who was not performing accountability, but actually practicing it. She said, "I should have taken the call in October when you tried to explain." She paused. "That was on me." He held his coffee. He said, "I appreciate that." She said, "I'm not saying it to get the Harrington account back." She said, "I'm saying it because it's true, and because you told Paul Harrington the truth when he asked you directly, and I think you deserve the same." He looked at her for a moment. He said, "Okay." He said it simply, with the full weight of someone accepting something that has been properly offered. He said, "Come in." The garage was the kind of garage that was organized the way certain people organized things, not in the sense of everything being tidy, but in the sense of everything being where it was for a reason, and the reason being legible. The tools had places, the vehicles had a workflow, the small office in the back had paperwork on the desk that was in stacks that were dense but not chaotic, the stacks of someone who kept information and could find it. He showed her the records, 8 years of Vertex vehicles, every service, every repair, every part. His father had kept handwritten logs, and he had transferred them to digital when he took over, so the full history was accessible. He pulled up the Vertex file and walked her through it with the focused clarity of someone presenting evidence, not to win an argument, but to show her what the argument had been about. She looked at the 2019 records. She saw the breakdown season. 7 Vertex vehicles in 7 weeks, 3 of them the critical refrigerated units that carried temperature-sensitive cargo for 2 of her father's largest clients. She saw the rate her father had been charged, below market even for that year. She saw the note her father had made in the contract renewal. "Joe, thank you for holding the line this year." It was signed with her father's first name, which is how he signed things to people he considered friends. She sat with this for a moment. She said, he was going to lose the clients. Thomas said, if those units had gone down for 3 weeks during the Savannah contracts, he would have lost Harrington and the Mitchell account both. He paused. Joe had 2 other shops wanting the refrigerated unit work. He turned them away to prioritize Vertex. She said, because of the relationship. He said, because Joe Mercer believed in keeping his word to people who had kept their word to him. He said it simply. He said, your father had been a good client for 3 years at that point. Joe didn't walk away when it was hard. She absorbed this. He said, that's what the rate was. She said, a rate is a statement about the relationship. He said, yes. He looked at her. That's what I was trying to tell your office in October. She said, I know. She looked at the records. She said, Thomas. She paused. She said it with the specific quality of someone who has arrived at a decision through a process that was longer and more thorough than the decision itself required. She said, I want to come back. She paused. Vertex. I want to bring the fleet back to Mercer. He looked at her. He said, the Concord contract? She said, has an early termination clause. She said it directly. I read it when I signed it. She paused. It's expensive. She paused. Less expensive than 31% of annual revenue. He said, I don't know if Paul Harrington is coming back. She said, that's his decision. She said it without the performance of not caring. She did care, the revenue was real, but with the honest acknowledgement that it was outside her control. She said, I'm not asking you to fix Harrington. I'm asking you to let me fix the thing I broke. He said, the rate. She said, the correct rate. She looked at him. Whatever that is. I want to understand what the work actually costs, and I want to pay it. She paused. And I want a contract with terms that are real, not a month-to-month. She said, my father's way worked because of my father. She said, my way needs to work because the terms are right. He held his coffee. He looked at the bay where someone was working on something she couldn't see from the office. He said, I have a condition. She said, name it. He said, my son. He said it looking at the bay. He's 5. He goes to kindergarten at Old Providence Elementary. He said it with the specific precision of someone who was about to name the non-negotiable. He said, I do school pickup at 2:45 every day. He paused. Every day. He said, he's 5. His mother is not in the picture. He said it the way he said the history of the 2019 breakdown season, as information, not as a bid for sympathy. He said, he comes home to me. She said, he comes home to you. He said, yes. She was quiet for a moment. She thought about her father visiting a mechanic on his birthday every year for 8 years. She thought about 2 people having coffee and talking about the Panthers, and a rate that was not a rate, but was a statement about what a relationship was worth. She thought about the thing that was on the balance sheet and the thing that the number was made of were 2 different things, and that how to deserve the first, you had to understand the second. She said, Thomas. She said it with the decision fully made. She said, I have a question that is not about the contract. He said, okay. She said, your father called you last Thursday. She said, after the termination. She paused.
He asked you what you needed, and you told him you didn't need anything. She said, "What did you actually need?" He looked at his coffee. He said, "I needed someone to have the conversation I'm having with you right now." He said it simply. He said, "I needed someone to come here and look at the records and understand what my father built over 8 years and why it was what it was." He paused. "Not to get the account back." He said, "Because my father is sick." He said it with the specific economy of someone who has been saying it for long enough to have found the right size for it. He said, "Not terminally, but enough." He said, "He worked on these trucks for 8 years, and they were his." He paused. He looked at the bay. They were his, and then they were just gone over a number in an audit. He said, "I needed someone to look at what was here and see it." She looked at the records in front of her, 8 years of handwritten logs and careful notes, and a rate that was a statement about what a relationship was worth. She looked at the bay where someone was working. She thought about truck 9 and the right rear axle bearing, and what it meant that someone knew which truck had a personality and what normal looked like for that specific truck. She said, "I see it." He said, "I know." He said it quietly. He said, "You came at 6:58. She said, "I said 7. He said, "I know." He said, "You were 2 minutes early." She said, "I'm always early when something matters." He looked at her. She looked at him. The garage on Providence Road was around them, the Tuesday morning sounds, the bay, the records, the coffee going slightly cold in the March Charlotte air, and neither of them said anything for a moment that was not nothing. He said, "I'll call my attorney today." He said, "She can have a draft contract to your office by Thursday."
She said, "Thomas." She said it looking at the records and not at him, which was her way when she was about to say something that required her to be precise rather than composed. She said, "Can I ask you about your son?" He looked at her. He said, "What about him?" She said, "His mother." She paused. "You said she's not in the picture." She said it carefully, not as curiosity, but as the question underneath the condition he had named, the thing she needed to understand the condition correctly. She said, "Is that recent?" He said 2 years. He said it the way he said everything that was true and costly, directly without dressing it. He said, "She left when Noah was 3. He paused. "Not a dramatic situation, not a bad person. She said she had made a decision too young and she wanted a different life, and she was honest about it, which was the best version of that conversation available." He paused. "She sends cards on his birthday." He said, "That's where it is." She said 2:45. He said 2:45. He said it with the settled certainty of someone who had built a life around a fixed point and found the fixed point to be the right one. He said, "He came to the garage with me last summer for a week when the school program he was in got canceled. He was here every day from 8 to 2:45, and he sat on the rolling stool in Bay 2 and handed me tools and asked questions I couldn't always answer." He paused. Joe's face that whole week, he looked at the bay. "My father just watched him and didn't say a word for an hour and then said, 'There it is.' He said it the way my grandfather used to say it to him." She said, "There it is." He said, "Like something you recognized arriving." He paused. "Something you'd been watching for." She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the records, and then at the bay, and then at the desk where the picture was. She had not looked at it directly yet, but she looked at it now. It was a small framed photograph, the kind taken on a phone rather than a camera, of a small boy in overalls standing in the garage bay with a very serious expression and a wrench in both hands that was clearly too large for them. The wrench was the kind you used on heavy equipment. The boy was holding it with both hands, and the expression on his face was the expression of someone who had been given a real tool and understood the weight of having been trusted with it. She said, "How old is he there?" He said, 4. He said, "He asked me why the wrench had to be that size for that bolt, and I told him about torque, and he thought about it for about a minute and then said, 'So the wrench is the right size for the job, not for the person.'" He paused. "I didn't know what to say to that." She said, "What did he say?" He said, "That was exactly right." He looked at the photograph. He said, "Yes," he said, "that makes sense." He paused, and then he went back to holding the wrench. He said it with the warmth that came into his voice when he talked about Noah,
unguarded, specific, the warmth of someone for whom this particular person was the organizing fact of their life. She said, "Thomas." He said, "Yeah." She said, "When your father got sick," she paused. She said, "You were the one who came back to run this." She said it as a statement, not a question, but she left the space. He said, "My father called me in October 2 years ago." He said, "The same October you sent the new rate contract." He said it without irony, just noting the timing. He said, he had a cardiac event, not major, but enough. He said, "I was in Atlanta. I had a position at a larger shop, fleet work, commercial scale." He paused. "I came back for a weekend, and I looked at this place, and I looked at my father, and I looked at Noah, and I understood that the Atlanta position and the commercial scale were not the shape of the thing." He paused. He said it with the same quality he used for everything that was simply true about how he was made. He said, "This was the shape of the thing." She said, "You gave up the commercial position?" He said, "I reorganized around what mattered." He said it plainly, with no performance of sacrifice. He said, "The garage is good work. The clients are good people." He paused. "And my father can come in on Tuesdays and drink bad coffee and tell me things I already know that turn out to be things I didn't know." She said, "The things that aren't in any training?" He said, "Everything useful is in the things that aren't in any training." He looked at the records in front of her. He said, "You know that." He said it without flattery, simply as a fact he had formed about her in the hour they had been talking. He said, "You knew something was wrong with what you did in October the moment Paul Harrington called." He said, "Not because of the revenue." He paused. "Because something in the number didn't match something you already knew about the shape of the company your father built." She looked at him. She said, "I knew something was wrong when you called my office 3 times. He said, "You couldn't have known what it was from the outside." She said, "No." She paused. "But I could have taken the call." She said it with the specific weight of someone who is not performing accountability, but enacting it. She said, "I should have taken the call." He said, "You're here now." He said it without diminishing the other thing, just as a fact about the present, which was what mattered in terms of what could be done. He said, "That's what my father used to say about mistakes." He said, "You can't go back to before the mistake. You can go to the morning after it and start from there." She said, "The morning after it." He said, "Yes." He picked up his coffee. He said, "This is that morning." She looked at the photograph on the desk, the boy with the wrench and the serious face, and the understanding that the wrench was the right size for the job and not for the person. She thought about her father and the birthday visits and the coffee and the rate that was a statement. She thought about a morning after and what it meant to start from a place that was honest rather than managed. She said, "Show me the rest of the records." She said it as the decision it was. She said, "The full 8 years. I want to understand all of it." He turned to the computer. He pulled up the full history. He said, "This is going to take a while." She said, "I have time." She looked at the bay and the records and the photograph. She said, "I cleared my morning." He said, "Okay." He looked at her. He said, "Coffee's gonna run out." She said, "There's a place on Selwyn that's worth the trip." He said, "You'll have to go. I can't leave the bay unattended." She said, "I'll go." She paused. "You take it black?" He looked at her. He said, "How did you know?" She said, "The mug on your desk." She said it simply, with the observation landing the way observations land when the person making them has been paying attention. She said, "No ring marks from a spoon, no creamer residue." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "You notice things." She said, "I notice things that matter." She held his gaze. She said, "I missed the things that mattered in October." She paused. "I'm correcting that." He looked at her with the dark eyes that she was beginning to understand were not guarded, but specific, choosing what to take in and what to give back, the eyes of someone who had been through enough to understand what was worth the full attention. He said, "Diana." He used her first name for the first time, and it landed with the specific weight of someone who has decided to use a name rather than arrived at it by accident. He said, "The morning after is only useful if you stay for the full morning." She said, "I'll stay." He said, "Okay." He turned back to the records. He said, "Start here." She pulled her chair closer to the desk. She looked at the records. She started at the beginning, paused. "The fleet vehicles that are currently with Concord, I'll need the service history from them to understand what I'm working with." She said, "I'll get it this week." He said, "Truck 9. He said, "Is it still in the fleet?" She said, "Yes. Tell me if anything feels warm in the right rear." He said it with the complete naturalness of someone for whom this information was simply part of how you managed a truck. He paused. "I'll check it at the first service." She said, "I will." She left the garage at 8:40. She sat in her car for a moment. She called her father. He answered on the second ring. She said, "Dad?" He said, "Diana?" He said her name with the specific quality of a father who has been waiting for a call and is working hard to sound like he was not waiting. She said, "I went to the garage this morning." She paused. She said, "I'm sorry." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "Joe's records." He said, "Thomas showed you." She said, "Yes." She paused. She said, "I treated it like a number." He said, "It wasn't a number." She said, "I know that now." He said, "Thomas is a good man." He said it with the same warmth she had heard in Thomas's voice when he talked about his father. He said, "He's been running that garage like Joe taught him." He paused. "He has a son, 5 years old. He's got a picture of the boy on the desk." He said it the way her father said things that mattered to him, folded into the practical, visible only if you knew how to look. She said, "I know, he told me." He said, "You two had a real conversation." She said, "We did." She paused. She said, "Dad, I need to ask you something I should have asked before I did the audit." He said, "I know." She said, "Not just about Mercer." She said, "About all of it." She paused. "You built those relationships over 20 years, and I've been treating them like they should survive being managed instead of being maintained." She said, "I need to know what I don't know." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "When can you come to Florida?" She said, "Next weekend." He said, "Good." He said, "Bring a notebook." She said, "I always bring a notebook." He said, "I know you do." He said it with the warmth of a father who knew her daughter well. He said, "This time, use it for the things that aren't in the financials." She sat in the car on Providence Road. She thought about Truck 9 and the right rear axle bearing. She thought about a rate that was a statement. She thought about two men having coffee on a birthday for 8 years and the specific weight of the thing that was not on any balance sheet but held everything else up. She thought about Paul Harrington. She was not going to get that call back. She had done the math, and the math was the math, and the early termination fee was in the wire. What she could do, and what she intended to do, was understand the texture of the business she had inherited in a way that she had not understood it before. She thought about Thomas Mercer at 2:45 at the old Providence Elementary gate.
She thought about a 5-year-old coming home to his father. She thought about a condition stated not as an apology, but as the shape of a life that the other party needed accurate information about. She thought about what her father had been trying to tell her for 3 years and what she had been too certain of her own framework to hear. She drove back to the office. She called Marcus. She said, "The Concord contract." She said, "What's the early termination fee?" He told her. She said, "Process it." Marcus said, "Are we sure?" She said, "I'm sure." She put the phone down. She looked at the Charlotte morning through her office window. She looked at the line item on her screen that had been a number and now a person and a garage and 8 years of handwritten logs and Truck 9's right rear axle bearing in the rate that was a statement, in the birthday visits, in the coffee, in the Panthers. She had inherited a company. She had been building it like someone who had inherited a company. What she had missed was what her father had built it like someone who understood that the number on the balance sheet and the thing the number was made of were two different things, and that you had to understand the second to deserve the first. She opened a new document. She started a list. At the top, she wrote, "What isn't in the financials?" She had a notebook. She was going to use it. If this story found you today, share it with someone who needed to be reminded that the number and the thing the number is made of are not the same. Subscribe for a brand new story every single week. We will see you next time.